Ilara sat by the small, cracked window of her room, staring at the fading sunlight that struggled through the heavy clouds. Outside, the village was already quieting down, smoke curling lazily from chimneys and the distant sound of church bells echoed faintly across the valley. Yet in her heart there was no peace. The walls of her stepmother's house felt tighter than the room itself, and the air smelled of damp wood and harsh authority. Her stepmother, Lady Marvella, ruled the household with iron precision. She had a sharp tongue, colder than the winter winds that swept through the hills. Every day, Ilara's life was filled with chores, endless polishing, dusting, sewing, and fetching water. Mistakes were punished with scolding or denial of even the simplest comforts. Her stepsisters, equally cruel but masked under false smiles, watched her falter and whispered behind her back. Ilara sighed, pressing her small hands against the cool glass. Freedom seemed like a distant dream, something that belonged to the stories her mother once told her before she disappeared years ago. "One day," she whispered to herself, "one day I will be free." But even as she spoke the words, the weight of fear and doubt pressed against her chest. It was then that the messenger arrived, his horse thundering across the courtyard. Ilara watched as Lady Marvella flung open the door, her skirts flaring like dark flames, eyes glittering with opportunity. "A letter for me?" she demanded sharply, snatching the envelope. Ilara's pulse quickened when she saw the seal, an unfamiliar symbol embossed in deep crimson wax. The letter was short but clear, a proposal for marriage. The sender claimed to be a nobleman, willing to take a bride immediately. There was no time for negotiation, only the promise of wealth and status. Lady Marvella's eyes sparkled. "This is perfect," she said, her voice sharp with triumph. "Ilara, it seems your fate is finally decided. Pack your things." Ilara's heart thudded painfully in her chest. She had not seen the groom's face, had no idea who he was, but the promise of escape shimmered before her like a distant star. The thought of leaving the house, of finally stepping beyond her stepmother's control, was intoxicating. She tried to speak, to voice a question, a hesitation, but Lady Marvella silenced her with a sharp look. "You will go," Lady Marvella said. "Do not speak unless spoken to. This is for your own good." And so that evening Ilara left. She wore a simple dress, one of the few she owned, and carried only a small bundle of belongings. As she stepped into the carriage, her hands trembled, not just from fear, but from a strange excitement. The world beyond her home was unknown, mysterious, and possibly dangerous. Yet for the first time she felt the faint stirrings of hope. The road to the stranger's home wound through dark forests, where the trees seemed to lean toward the carriage, whispering in voices only the wind could carry. Ilara pressed her face against the window, trying to make sense of the strange shadows that flickered across the path. A part of her shivered at the thought of what awaited, but another part of her thrilled at the unknown. As night fell, the carriage slowed, and finally, they arrived at the gates of an immense castle. It rose like a black mountain, its spires reaching toward the clouds, faintly illuminated by the pale moonlight. The walls were carved with strange symbols, and the gates seemed impossibly tall. A cold wind swept through the courtyard as the carriage stopped, carrying with it the scent of damp stone and something older, ancient, untamed, and powerful. Ilara's eyes widened. She had never seen a place like this. It was beautiful and terrifying all at once, a kingdom of shadows and whispered secrets. Her heart beat faster as the carriage doors opened. A tall figure stood waiting. Cloaked in black, he did not bow, but his presence was commanding. Even in the dim moonlight, she could see the sharp lines of his face, pale as marble, and eyes that glimmered faintly, like coals buried under ash. "You must be Ilara," he said, his voice smooth and deep, carrying a weight that made her shiver. There was no smile, no warmth, only a quiet authority that filled the air like a storm about to break. I am," she stammered, bowing her head instinctively. He nodded once slowly, as if measuring her very soul with those piercing eyes. "Welcome to your new home." The carriage doors closed behind her, leaving the courtyard and the village far behind. Inside the castle, every shadow seemed alive, curling along the walls and ceiling as if it had a mind of its own. The halls were vast, lined with statues of figures long gone, their faces frozen in expressions that were almost human, almost cruel. Ilara felt small, fragile, but somehow aware that she had stepped into a world larger, stranger, and more dangerous than anything she had ever known. Her husband led her through winding corridors, past tapestries depicting battles, kings, and creatures that seemed part human, part beast. Alara's mind spun with questions, but she did not dare speak. The castle hummed with a quiet power, a pulse that seemed tied to the very heartbeat of the man walking beside her. Finally, they reached a room lit by candles whose flames danced with unusual light, casting warm gold against the cold stone. "This will be your chamber," he said simply. He did not enter further, only waited by the door watching. Alara swallowed hard. "Thank you," she whispered, unsure whether her gratitude was real or forced. "Rest well," he replied, his eyes meeting hers for a moment longer than necessary. There was something in that gaze, something that felt like both promise and warning. Alone, Alara moved to the bed and sank onto it, exhaustion pulling at her limbs. Her thoughts raced. Who was this man? Why did she feel both frightened and strangely drawn to him? She could sense power in his presence, a weight that seemed almost unnatural. And yet, a small part of her heart whispered that perhaps he was not cruel, not like her stepmother. Perhaps he too was lonely, trapped by forces she could not yet understand. As she lay in the unfamiliar room, the moonlight streaming through the tall window, she noticed the faint glow of eyes in the darkness outside her chamber. Not human eyes, she realized with a shiver, but they were watching. Silent, patient, unblinking. A chill ran down her spine. The house she had escaped had been full of cruelty, but this castle, this man, held a darkness far older, deeper, and more complicated. And yet, she did not feel the same fear that had shackled her in her stepmother's home. Instead, there was a strange thrill, a quiet hope that perhaps she had not merely escaped, but stepped into a new world where she might finally be free, in ways she could not yet imagine. Somewhere in the castle, the stranger watched as she settled into the bed. His lips curved into a faint, almost imperceptible smile. He had not spoken much, but he knew. He knew she would not flee, not entirely, and that intrigued him. In centuries, few had come willingly into his domain, and fewer still had touched the part of him that still longed for connection. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows, and shadows moved like living things across the stone floor. Alara pulled the blanket closer, both afraid and exhilarated. She did not yet understand the full weight of her choice, nor the depths of the darkness she had entered, but she felt alive, perhaps for the first time, as if the chains of her past life had loosened just enough for her to breathe. Her eyes grew heavy, and sleep began to claim her. But even as she drifted, she felt the weight of the castle's gaze, the stranger's unseen presence in the dark, and the strange, almost magnetic pull that promised both danger and salvation. Somewhere in the shadows, her future waited, shrouded in secrets, power, and a fate far greater than she could imagine. And as the first faint hint of dawn touched the sky, a single thought whispered through her mind. "I have escaped. But to what?" Alara awoke to silence, the castle's vast halls around her humming faintly with a strange, almost living presence. The moonlight had shifted, casting silver patterns across the stone floor. She rubbed her eyes, still half in the haze of sleep, and tried to remember where she was. For a moment, the events of the previous night, the carriage ride, the towering gates, the piercing eyes of her husband felt like a dream. The room, though beautiful, felt different in the cold light of night. The stone walls were adorned with tapestries that seemed to move as she looked at them, their embroidered figures twisting subtly in the flickering candlelight. Shadows curled along the corners, deeper and darker than ordinary shadows, as if the castle itself was alive, observing her every movement. Alara rose, her bare feet touching the chill of the stone floor, and approached the window. The courtyard below was empty, but the air held a faint rustle like wings brushing against the walls. A shiver ran down her spine. She had no idea what to expect in this place, and every instinct in her body told her that it was unlike any home she had ever known. Footsteps echoed in the hall outside. Ilara's heart skipped a beat. The door opened and he appeared. Kale, the stranger, the man she had married to escape her stepmother's cruelty. He stepped inside, his presence filling the room as if the air itself bent around him. His cloak swept across the floor silently, and his pale face glowed faintly in the candlelight. His eyes, dark, piercing, and impossibly deep, held a weight that made her tremble. Yet there was a quiet curiosity in them too, as if he were reading her thoughts without speaking. "Good evening." Kyle said, his voice low and smooth, carrying a strange authority. There was no anger or cruelty in his tone, but it was commanding nonetheless. "Good evening," Alara replied softly, her voice barely above a whisper. She curtsied slightly, though it felt awkward in the unfamiliar room. He studied her for a long moment, his gaze steady. "You are awake earlier than I expected. Most are still sleeping when I make my rounds." Alara hesitated, unsure what to say. She wanted to ask who he really was, why the castle felt so alive, why the shadows seemed to watch her, but fear held her back, a fear different from the one she had known under her stepmother. This fear was sharp, tinged with fascination. Kale's eyes softened slightly. "You need not fear me," he said, though there was a hint of something in his tone. Sadness, perhaps, or loneliness. "I am not here to harm you." Alara nodded, though her heart raced. I am not afraid," she said, though the words felt small and fragile against the enormity of the man before her. Kyle inclined his head. "Very well. Then you will learn the ways of this place, and perhaps in time you will understand its rules." He gestured toward the door. "Come, I will show you the castle." As Alara followed, she felt both awe and dread. The halls were vast, stretching far beyond what her mind could comprehend. Statues of ancient kings and queens lined the corridors, their eyes seeming to follow her as she walked. Tapestries depicted battles and ceremonies long forgotten, their threads shimmering faintly as if infused with magic. Kyle led her to a grand hall, its ceiling so high that the far end disappeared into shadows. Candles floated in midair, illuminating the room with a soft golden glow. Alara's breath caught. She had never seen anything like this. "This castle is alive," she whispered, more to herself than to Kale. "In a manner of speaking," Kale replied. "It responds to those within it, to those it considers significant." His eyes lingered on her for a moment, and Alara felt the weight of his gaze like a physical touch. They continued their walk, and Kyle began to speak of his life, though carefully, sparingly. "I am not an ordinary man," he said finally. "This place, my home, it is bound to me and I to it. There are forces here that are older than kingdoms, older than even memory. You must learn to respect them." Alara felt a shiver run through her. She had expected a husband, perhaps a lord, but not this ancient, mysterious power that radiated from him. Yet despite the fear, there was something compelling about him, something that drew her closer even as it warned her to stay away. "You are not afraid?" he asked suddenly, his eyes narrowing slightly. I am," she admitted, her voice trembling. "But I feel strange, like I should be here, even if I don't understand why." Kale's expression softened, and for a moment, he seemed almost human, almost vulnerable. "Most who enter my home are frightened. You are different. That will be both your strength and your burden." They reached a smaller chamber filled with books, scrolls, and artifacts. The air smelled of parchment and something older, metallic and faintly sweet. Kale gestured to a chair. "Sit, learn what you must. Knowledge is a shield as much as courage." Alara approached cautiously, running her fingers along the spines of the books. They were written in languages she could not read, yet the magic in the room seemed to hum in response to her touch. The sensation was both thrilling and unsettling, as if the castle itself acknowledged her presence and her potential. "Why am I here?" she asked finally, her voice small but steady. "Why did you take me?" Kale's gaze held hers, intense and unwavering. "You came of your own will," he said. "You sought freedom, and in doing so, you stepped into a world you cannot yet understand." "I did not take you. You chose the path," Alara swallowed hard. "But what are you?" she asked, unable to hold the question back. Kale's lips curved slightly, a hint of a smile that did not reach his eyes. "I am someone bound to darkness and night, yet not entirely a creature of it. I have lived longer than most, seen empires rise and fall, and felt the loneliness of immortality. That is what you must understand. The night is not kind, but it is honest." Alara felt a shiver run down her spine. Immortality. Loneliness. The words hung in the air like cold mist. Yet beneath the fear there was fascination. This was not a cruel man, not like her stepmother. He was something else entirely. Terrifying, yes, but also deeply compelling. For the first time since leaving home, Alara felt a mixture of fear, awe, and a strange, cautious hope. Perhaps she could belong here. Perhaps she could navigate this strange, dark world and find a place for herself. The hours passed as Cale spoke, carefully revealing fragments of his life, never all at once. He spoke of his responsibilities, of the dangers that lurked in the shadows beyond the castle walls, and of the fragile balance he maintained between the living and the forces that sought to disrupt it. Elara listened, absorbing every word, understanding that she had entered a world where knowledge and courage were more valuable than strength or wealth. As midnight approached, Cale led her back to her chamber. The castle was quieter now, though the shadows seemed thicker, almost watching. "Rest," he said simply. "Tomorrow you will begin to learn what it means to live here. And perhaps in time, you will learn to see the night as it truly is." Elara lay down, her mind spinning with the revelations of the evening. The castle was alive. The man she married was no ordinary noble, and her new life would be unlike anything she had known. Yet despite the fear, there was a strange thrill, a sense that she had stepped into a destiny larger than herself. Before sleep claimed her, she felt the faintest echo of a presence outside her door, silent, patient, and watchful. It was not threatening, but it carried a weight, a promise of secrets yet to be revealed. Elara closed her eyes, her heart beating fast. She had escaped her stepmother's cruelty, but the castle and its master held mysteries she could not yet comprehend. And somewhere deep within she sensed that the stranger she married, the vampire king, was both her protector and her challenge. The night was his domain, and now it was hers as well. She drifted into uneasy sleep, the candlelight flickering across the room, shadows dancing like living things. And somewhere in the darkness Cale watched, silent and unreadable, aware that her presence had already begun to change him. The castle was alive, the night was deep, and Elara's journey into darkness and perhaps into love had only just begun. The days in the castle began to blur into one another. Elara awoke each morning to the quiet hum of ancient walls, the distant creak of corridors, and the soft echo of Cale's presence moving unseen. Each day was a mixture of lessons, exploration, and silent observation. The castle seemed to test her, guiding her through halls that twisted like serpents and rooms filled with objects that hummed with old magic. Kyle's presence was everywhere, though often silent. Sometimes he would appear at the edge of a hallway, watching her with eyes that seemed to pierce her very thoughts. Other times he would glide into a room without a sound, his pale hand reaching for a book or a scroll before vanishing into the shadows again. He rarely spoke without purpose, yet his gaze carried more weight than words ever could. Elara learned quickly that courage was necessary here. A dropped candle could scorch more than the hand that held it, and missteps in conversation could draw sharp corrections from Cale or the unseen forces of the castle. Yet despite the pressure, there was a strange beauty to this place. Every corner held secrets, and every shadow seemed to hide a story waiting to be uncovered. One evening, Elara wandered into the castle's library. The room was enormous, stretching far beyond the reach of any ordinary castle, its ceilings lost in shadow. Shelves rose like towers filled with books that smelled of centuries. The faint scent of parchment mixed with something sweeter, like the forest after rain, alive and full of possibility. As she ran her fingers along the spines, she felt a sudden presence. Cale was standing just behind her, tall and silent. She startled slightly but did not turn around. "You have an affinity for knowledge," he said softly, his voice smooth, resonating with authority. "That is rare. Most fear what they cannot understand." Elara swallowed, trying to steady her voice. I want to understand. I want to know what this place is. And what you are." Cale's eyes glimmered faintly in the candlelight. "Curiosity is dangerous here, but perhaps it is also necessary." He gestured toward a high shelf where a single dark-bound book rested. "That book is older than most of the people you have known. If you are brave enough, you may learn something from it. If not, it may learn something from you." Elara's pulse quickened. She reached for the book carefully, feeling its weight in her hands. The moment her fingers touched the cover, a faint hum traveled through her body like the echo of a heartbeat not her own. She opened it slowly, pages filled with strange symbols and illustrations of creatures both beautiful and terrifying. She did not understand the words, yet the images stirred something deep inside her, a mixture of fear, fascination, and longing. Kyle moved closer, his presence overwhelming yet strangely comforting. "The night is patient," he said, almost to himself. It watches, it tests, and it waits for those who can see beyond the surface. Ilara felt her heart beat faster. His words, his gaze, and the castle itself were weaving around her, binding her in ways she did not fully comprehend. She was no longer just a girl who had fled her stepmother. She was a part of this place now, connected to its secrets and its shadows. Days turned into weeks, and Ilara began to notice changes within herself. She moved through the castle with more confidence, learned to read the subtle signs of danger, and even began to anticipate Cale's moods. They clashed often, his stern, commanding nature against her bold, questioning spirit, but each argument, each confrontation, carried a subtle undercurrent of mutual fascination. One night, she followed him through a hidden corridor, curiosity pulling her steps. The hall was lined with mirrors, tall and ancient, their surfaces slightly warped. Cale stopped before one, placing his hand on the glass. The reflection shimmered and shifted, showing not his own face, but a vision of Ilara. She saw herself taller, stronger, with eyes that glowed faintly in the dark. The shadow of her past lingered, but there was also a sense of power, something she had never known. "You see yourself as you could be," Cale said quietly, not moving his gaze from the mirror. "But the night does not give freely. To become more, you must endure. To grow, you must face what others flee from." Ilara's breath caught. The vision was beautiful, frightening, and full of potential. She realized that she had been hiding not just from her stepmother, but from her own strength, her own courage. The castle, Cale, the night itself, they were teaching her, shaping her into someone new. Yet fear lingered. She had fled one form of control only to step into another, far more enigmatic. Cale's power was undeniable, his presence commanding and his gaze unrelenting. She felt both drawn to him and wary of the depth he represented. Each glance, each subtle gesture was a test, an invitation she did not fully understand. One evening, during a storm that rattled the castle windows, Cale revealed more of himself. They stood in the grand hall, the candlelight flickering across his sharp features. "I am not entirely of the living world," he said, his voice low, resonating with centuries of experience. "I carry the weight of time, of loss, of solitude. The night has shaped me, but it has also trapped me. Few can see beyond the darkness. You are different." Ilara's heart beat faster. The revelation frightened her, yet a part of her felt a thrill. He was not cruel, at least not like her stepmother, but he was something far older, far more powerful. She did not yet fully understand him, and that both terrified and fascinated her. I want to understand," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I do not want to be afraid." Kyle studied her for a long moment, then inclined his head slightly. "Then you must learn patience. Courage is not the absence of fear. It is the choice to face it again and again. You have already begun that journey, though you do not know it yet." Their interactions grew more complex. They argued, debated, and tested each other's limits. Cale's dominance was tempered by moments of unexpected gentleness. Ilara's curiosity and courage challenged him, forcing him to confront emotions he had long buried: loneliness, longing, and the faint hope of companionship. One night, in the quiet of the library, Ilara dared to reach for Cale's hand as he pointed to an ancient map. He did not withdraw. Instead, he let her touch linger for a moment, his eyes meeting hers with a depth that made her breath catch. The air between them was charged, electric, as if the castle itself had paused to watch this delicate, unspoken exchange. "You are bold," he said finally, his voice soft. "Few dare to approach what they do not fully understand." "I am learning," Ilara replied, her voice steady despite the tremor in her heart. "And I want to know everything." Cale's lips curved in a faint, unreadable smile. "Then you must be ready for the consequences. Knowledge and power come at a price." Days passed, and the castle seemed to hum with anticipation. Shadows deepened. Whispers grew faintly audible, and the corridors seemed to guide Ilara toward discoveries she had not expected. She began to realize that the bond between her and Cale was growing, subtle, complex, and filled with tension. She could sense his moods, anticipate his gestures, and feel the pull of his presence even when he was not near. And yet, the fear remained. She was not entirely safe nor entirely free. Cale's power was immense, and she was only beginning to understand the forces that bound him, and herself. But with fear came fascination, and with fascination came a strange, undeniable longing. Ilara began to understand something crucial. She had not just entered a castle or married a stranger. She had stepped into a world of shadows and desire, of power and loneliness, and she was becoming part of it in ways she could not yet name. Her courage, her curiosity, and her growing connection to Kale were reshaping her, teaching her that strength could come from fear, and freedom could come from choosing to remain in a place that challenged her every limit. That night, as she lay in her chamber, she touched the dark-bound book she had discovered weeks ago. The pages seemed to whisper to her, as if urging her forward, guiding her toward knowledge, understanding, and perhaps even a form of power she had never imagined. Outside, the wind howled, rattling the windows, and the castle seemed to sigh, alive and watchful. Somewhere in the darkness, Kale lingered, observing without entering. His thoughts were hidden, yet she sensed his attention. He had tested her, challenged her, and now he waited, patient, silent, yet drawn to her courage and curiosity in ways he had not expected. Ilara drifted into sleep, her mind alive with images of shadows, ancient halls, and glowing eyes. The castle had begun to feel less like a prison and more like a world that could be hers if she dared. And as the candlelight flickered across the stone, a single truth whispered through her dreams. She was no longer just a girl fleeing cruelty. She was becoming someone far stronger, far braver, and far more entangled in the mysteries of the night than she could yet understand. Storm clouds gathered over the castle, darkening the sky even before night fell. The wind rattled the tall stone windows, carrying with it the scent of rain and something older, something that whispered of forgotten battles and lingering magic. Ilara stood at the edge of the terrace, her hair whipping around her face, and watched the storm approach. Every lightning flash revealed the jagged peaks of the distant mountains, and she felt both exhilaration and unease. The castle, for all its shadows and secrets, had begun to feel like home, but danger always lingered at its edges. Kale appeared silently beside her, as if drawn by her thoughts. His cloak fluttered in the wind, and the candlelight from within the castle cast sharp angles across his pale, perfect features. He did not speak immediately, only stood with her observing the storm, his eyes reflecting lightning and shadow alike. "You are restless," he said at last, his voice low and measured. "The storm mirrors your mind." Ilara turned to him, her eyes bright with determination. "I cannot be still, not now. I feel as if the castle itself is testing me, and I do not want to fail." Kale studied her for a long moment. "Courage is necessary, yes, but even courage must be tempered with patience. There are forces in this world, some seen, some unseen, that will not forgive rashness." Ilara's lips pressed together. She understood his warning, yet her heart burned with a desire to prove herself. For weeks she had learned the rules of the castle, discovered hidden rooms, read from ancient tomes, and begun to sense the castle's subtle magic. Each small victory built her confidence, yet it also brought her closer to Kale, whose presence was impossible to ignore. The storm broke suddenly, and a flash of lightning illuminated the courtyard. In that instant, Ilara saw them, figures moving quickly through the shadows, cloaked, silent, dangerous. Her heart leapt into her throat. Kale's hand found hers, strong and protective, and together they watched as the intruders advanced. "They have come for me," Kale said quietly, his voice steady, but there was an undercurrent of tension she had rarely heard. "Or perhaps for you. Either way, they underestimate the castle, and me." Ilara felt fear and determination mix within her. She had fled one danger, only to face another, yet the thought of standing beside Kale filled her with unexpected strength. She nodded, her grip on his hand firm. "I will help," she said, and for the first time she meant it fully. The intruders advanced, shadows moving across the stone floor like living things. Kale's eyes glimmered, and the castle seemed to respond, the air thickening with unseen power. Walls whispered secrets, corridors shifted subtly, and Ilara realized that the castle itself was a weapon, bending to Kale's will. Yet he needed her too, and she could sense it. Her courage, her awareness mattered in ways she had never imagined. Together, they moved through the castle, guiding each other, anticipating attacks, using knowledge of hidden passages and secret doors to their advantage. Ilara's heart pounded, but she felt alive in a way she never had under her stepmother's roof. Fear had become fuel, and courage had become a weapon. At last, they reached the central hall where the intruders paused. Kale stepped forward, his presence radiating authority, his eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. "You will not harm her," he said, his voice echoing, carrying a weight that made the shadow still. Leave or face the consequences. The intruders hesitated, and for a moment the storm outside seemed to pause. Then one of them stepped forward, a sword raised. Cale moved with inhuman speed, disarming the attacker effortlessly, yet he did not strike further. Instead, he leaned slightly toward Elara, protective and calm, as if she alone mattered in that moment. Elara's pulse raced. She realized then that she was not just a passive observer in this castle. She was part of its strength, part of its defense, and part of Cale's trust. The realization filled her with pride and fear in equal measure. She had come seeking freedom, and she had found it in a form she had never expected. Freedom through courage, through partnership, and through confronting danger head-on. The intruders finally retreated, disappearing into the storm, and Cale exhaled quietly. He turned to Elara, his expression softening in a way that made her heart ache. "You did well," he said, his voice low and intimate. "Few would have stood beside me and faced them without faltering." Elara's chest swelled with a mixture of relief and pride. I could not have done it without you," she admitted, her voice trembling slightly. Cale's eyes held hers for a long moment, and for the first time he stepped closer, the distance between them charged with unspoken emotion. "Perhaps," he said quietly, "but you do not need me to be strong. You are stronger than you realize. You have faced shadows, storms, and danger, and yet you endure." The castle seemed to sigh around them, shadows retreating slightly as if acknowledging her growth. Elara felt a deep sense of connection, not only to Cale but to the castle itself. She was no longer merely a girl fleeing her stepmother. She was a participant in a world of power, magic, and ancient responsibilities. That night, Cale led her to a secluded garden within the castle grounds. The storm had passed, leaving the air fragrant with wet stone and blooming night flowers. The moonlight shone silver on the leaves, casting elongated shadows across the pathways. Here, away from the walls and corridors, Cale's expression softened further. "There is more to this world than fear," he said, his gaze fixed on her. "Redemption is possible even for those who dwell in darkness. You must understand that." Elara's eyes met his, searching. "Redemption. For you?" Cale nodded slowly. "Yes, I have lived too long in solitude, burdened by choices I cannot undo. The night is patient, but even it cannot erase loneliness. Perhaps you can help me see another way." Elara's heart ached at his words. She had feared him, been fascinated by him, and yet now she understood the depth of his struggle. He was not simply powerful. He was vulnerable, carrying centuries of regret and longing. The realization stirred something within her, a mixture of compassion, courage, and an unspoken connection she could not yet name. I will try," she whispered. "Not because I must, but because I want to. I will not let you face this alone." Cale's gaze softened, and he extended his hand. "Then we face it together." The gesture, simple yet profound, shifted something between them. The castle, the night, and the storm outside all seemed to recede, leaving only the two of them in the quiet, silver-lit garden. For the first time, Elara felt not fear, but a tentative hope. A hope that strength and compassion could exist even in darkness, that connection could exist even in solitude. Days turned into nights, and the castle itself seemed to respond to their bond. The shadows grew less oppressive, the corridors less threatening. Elara's confidence grew, and Cale's guarded demeanor softened. They continued their lessons, their explorations, their arguments, and their quiet exchanges. Each interaction drew them closer, forging a connection that was complex, tense, and charged with unspoken emotion. Yet the threat of the outside world remained. Cale's enemies were still at large, forces that sought to exploit his power and the secrets of the castle. Elara knew that her courage would be tested again, that the bond they were forming was only as strong as the trials they could survive together. But for the first time, she did not feel helpless. She had grown, learned, and discovered a part of herself she had never known, a strength tempered by fear, a courage born from choice, and a loyalty that was hers alone. That night, as Elara lay in her chamber, she touched the dark-bound book she had found weeks ago. Its pages whispered secrets, guiding her toward knowledge and understanding. Outside, the moon cast silver light across the castle, illuminating shadows that seemed less threatening, less oppressive. And somewhere in the quiet darkness, Cale watched, silent and observant, aware that her presence had changed him as much as he had changed her. The storm had passed, but its echoes remained. in the castle, in the shadows, and in the hearts of both the girl and the vampire king. They had faced danger together, tested courage, and glimpsed the possibility of redemption. And though the night still held mysteries, they had begun to confront them, not as master and servant, but as equals bound by circumstance, trust, and the faintest stirrings of something deeper. Ilara closed her eyes, her heart steady and her mind alive with possibility. She had survived her stepmother's cruelty, faced the dangers of the night, and begun to discover the depth of her own strength. And somewhere in the shadows, Cale waited, patient, silent, and aware that the bond between them was only beginning to unfold. The castle lay quiet under the pale light of dawn, but the calm was fragile like glass over hidden depths. Ilara stood at the top of the main tower, looking out across the valley below. Mist curled along the mountains, and the first rays of sun barely touched the peaks. The storm from days past had left the air crisp, sharp, and full of expectation. Today, she knew, would be a turning point, not just for her but for Cale, for the castle, and for the fragile balance of power and peace they had struggled to maintain. Cale appeared silently at her side. His cloak brushed the stone, the faintest whisper of sound in the empty hall. For a moment he said nothing, only stood beside her as if drawing strength from her presence or perhaps lending it. "You are ready," he said quietly, his voice low and steady. "Whatever comes, you will face it with courage. You have already endured more than most ever will." Ilara turned to him, her eyes steady despite the flutter in her heart. I have learned from you, and from this place. I am not the same girl who ran from her stepmother." Cale's gaze softened. "No, you are stronger, and that strength will be tested today." A distant horn echoed through the valley, deep and resonant. Ilara felt a shiver run through her. It was a warning, a signal that forces beyond the castle had arrived. Cale's hand found hers, and the weight of his presence anchored her fear. "They are coming," he said simply, "enemies old and relentless. They believe the castle can be taken, that its master can be broken. They do not know what waits for them." Ilara's breath caught, but she nodded. "Then we face them. Together." The first figures appeared on the horizon, cloaked in shadows and steel. They advanced with purpose, unaware of the traps and secrets hidden in the castle's walls. Cale led her down through hidden corridors, past shifting halls and stairways that seemed to move like living things. The castle responded to his presence, shadows curling and stretching, doors sealing and corridors redirecting, as if alive and aware of the danger. Ilara's heart raced, but her mind was sharp. She remembered the lessons, the hidden passages, the strength she had discovered within herself. Each step was deliberate, each choice calculated. She was no longer a passive observer. She was a participant, a force in her own right. They reached the central hall where the invaders had begun to gather. The air was thick with tension, the silence heavy with anticipation. Cale's eyes glimmered faintly, reflecting the faint light of enchanted candles that floated in mid-air. "You will not harm this castle," he said, his voice calm but carrying immense authority. "Leave now, or face consequences you cannot imagine." The intruders hesitated, sensing the power radiating from him, the unnatural aura of command and shadow. But they were determined, and one of them stepped forward, sword raised, eyes burning with ambition. Cale moved with fluid, almost supernatural speed, disarming the attacker before he could strike. Ilara watched, her pulse racing, but she did not retreat. She stepped forward, her voice clear and steady. "Enough," she said, surprising herself with the firmness of her tone. "You have no right to invade this place. You will leave." The intruders faltered. Her courage, combined with Cale's presence, created a force that seemed greater than any weapon. Shadows swirled around her, subtle yet tangible, as if the castle itself had recognized her bravery. Cale's gaze met hers, and for a moment, the world narrowed to just the two of them. "You have grown," he said quietly. "Stronger than I expected." Ilara felt a mixture of pride and awe. She realized that she had truly become part of this world, not just surviving it, but shaping it, influencing it, and standing tall alongside its master. The intruders, sensing defeat, retreated into the mist, leaving the castle and its defenders unchallenged. The tension in the hall slowly eased, though the echoes of danger lingered in the air. Cale turned to her, a rare softness in his expression. "You have proven yourself," he said. "Not just in courage, but in heart. You have faced fear and chosen to endure. That is the mark of someone who belongs here." Alara's chest rose and fell, her heart still racing from the confrontation. I did it because of you, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Because you trusted me, guided me, and yet let me find my own strength. Kyle's lips curved in the faintest of smiles. No, you did it because you could. You did it because you chose to. I only showed the path, you walked it yourself. For the first time, there was a quiet intimacy between them, a sense of equality and understanding. The castle, silent and watchful, seemed to approve, the shadows retreating to their corners, the air settling into calm. Days passed, and the castle slowly returned to its rhythm. Alara continued to learn, explore, and grow. She discovered more of the secrets hidden in the walls, the magic bound to the stones, and the history written in shadows. And all the while, Kale's presence was near, protective yet unobtrusive, guiding yet allowing her independence. Their connection deepened, not through words alone, but through understanding, trust, and shared experience. Each glance, each small gesture carried meaning. They learned each other's boundaries, strengths, and vulnerabilities. Alara began to see not just the power in Kale, but the humanity hidden beneath centuries of solitude. And Kale, for his part, began to feel something he had long thought impossible: hope, connection, and perhaps even redemption. One night, as the moon bathed the castle in silver light, Kale led her to the highest tower. The wind whispered around them, carrying the scent of night flowers and distant rain. They stood together, looking out across the valley, silent yet profoundly connected. You have changed me, Kyle said quietly, his eyes reflecting the moonlight. Not through fear or obedience, but through courage, compassion, and the choice to stand with me despite everything. Alara reached out, placing her hand gently on his arm. We have changed each other, she said. I am not the girl who fled anymore, and you are not the man who stands alone. For a long moment, they simply stood there, the wind playing with her hair, the night alive with magic, and the castle silent yet aware. The bond between them had shifted from fear and fascination to trust and understanding, from shadows and danger to hope and connection. Kale finally spoke, his voice soft but certain. The night can be cruel, but it can also be a gift, and you are that gift, Alara. Not because of what you fear, but because of what you choose. Ilara's eyes filled with quiet emotion. She had fled cruelty, faced shadows, and discovered strength she never knew she possessed. And in Kale she had found a companion, not a master, not a tyrant, but someone who understood the weight of power, the burden of solitude, and the possibility of redemption. The dawn broke fully over the mountains, washing the castle in golden light. For the first time, the halls felt warm, the shadows comforting rather than threatening. Alara knew that the road ahead would not always be easy, that challenges and dangers would return. But she also knew that she had grown strong enough to face them, not alone, but with Kale by her side, and somewhere deep within the castle, in its hidden corners and shadowed halls, the whispers of ancient magic seemed to speak approval. The night had tested them, and both had endured. The bond forged in courage, trust, and quiet understanding would carry them forward, stronger than fear, stronger than darkness. Alara turned to Kyle, her heart steady, her mind clear. Whatever comes next, she said, we face it together. Kyle nodded, his eyes holding hers with a depth that stretched across centuries. Together, he agreed. For the first time, the castle felt like home. Not a prison, not a shadowed fortress, but a place of strength, hope, and the beginning of a new life. One forged in courage, trust, and the quiet, unspoken promise of a bond that could survive even the deepest darkness. And as the sun rose fully, casting light across stone and shadow, Alara and Kale stood together, ready to meet whatever the world and the night might bring.